today. My name is Kumu Karen Lealoha Carol. I'm a Kumu Lomi Lomi, and I also teach Hawaiian values and Ho'oponopono along with the Lomi Lomi. As Lomi Lomi is a spiritual practice, we learn to live our lives in the best way possible. So, as with all things that are spiritual, I'd like to begin with the pule, please. Pule kapo. E kia kua ihana kalani, amen kahanoa. Mahalo kia kua, we thank you for all of us being here today. We thank you for all of the blessings in our lives. And we thank you for this opportunity we have of sharing it with others. We ask that you bless us and our families and our loved ones to take us on our journey in life with joy, with balance and harmony. Mahalo nui loa, a mama ua noa, amen. I think a good way to start is with a chant. A chant is actually a prayer. Have you ever been down to the ocean or to the mountains and you really want to say something but the words don't come and you want to do something or show your feelings? So how we can do this is through a chant. And this particular chant is very simple. The words are Eho mai na kupuna o Hawaii aloha e. And we say Hawaii in the old way of doing it. I always say there were these two men, and one said, "How do you say it? Is it Hawaii or Hawaii?" And the second man said, "It's Hawaii." And the first guy said, "Thank you," and the second guy said, "You're welcome." So it's Hawaii, and the words mean, "Speak to me, answer me, ancestors of Hawaii, my love to you," and it requires an answer. Today, all of you have come into this room. You have brought many other people with you, all of your families, your loved ones. This room is filled with people, and I see all of them who came with you, and we would like to welcome all of them too. So, if you would join me, would you stand, please? And of course, aloha means my love to you. And when you say aloha I'd like for you to kind of give us in the circle so we can raise together. And so as we say aloha I want you to look at people all the way around the circle and say, aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Mahalo. So we do the chant 3 times, and it doesn't, we're not going to worry about what our voice sounds like. It's going to come from within. And we're going to say to our kupuna, thank you for being here. Our love to you. Okay, makaukau. Hai. He hoai. Na kupuna o Hawaii. Look around you. come back to Hawaii, it feels so good and warm and so welcoming. And this is what Hawaii is. It's like no place on earth. It is alive like mana. Mana in the ocean, in the aina, in the people, in what we eat. Generations of our ancestors have lived here, and our aumakua still guide us. You know, many of us have forgotten who we are. We have forgotten who we are, and no wonder we feel kind of out of place. We have also lost our way, and our inner compass has been going all kapakahi. So we don't know where we're supposed to be, what we're supposed to be doing. You know, in Hawaii, we were taught by our kupuna. You know, my tutu always taught us, when you go out the door, and you close the door quietly. Yeah? You don't slam the door. If you slam the door, you go and open the door, and you close it again. Because it taught us how to be respectful. And it taught us how to be kind to one another. And we always asked permission before we did something. These are just some of the values that they taught us and that are so important today. Now, when we learn about Hawaiian spirituality, this is not something that you learn in a textbook that you can just cross it off your list. It comes from within. And as we learn about our Hawaiian culture, it insists that we come from a place of aloha. So now we've heard, what is aloha? Isn't that hello, goodbye, and I love you? Well, there is a hidden point in aloha, as well as Hawaii, which is not a destination, but a living being. Aloha is simply a vibration of love. This is what it is. When you have aloha for someone, what you do is you help them with a generosity of spirit. You want to do all that you can for them. Not how much do I have to give, but how much can I give? And sometimes we tend to go overboard and give too much, and we overwhelm people, you know, with our aloha. But this is something that is unique to where we are and what we do. When the Western culture came to Hawaii, all of the ancient ways were banned. We could not dance a hula. My tutu could not speak the Hawaiian language, or her teacher would whack her hands with the ruler. And the healing arts were forbidden. And lua, hula, all of these, olelo Hawaii, it was forbidden. And so our culture was almost on the verge of being extinct. But there were those, our kupuna, who knew how important it was. And so they kept these values within the family. They kept the healing arts, lomi lomi, hula, and they practiced it secretly. Finally, when the bans were lifted, they still had a part of our culture that they had saved. But it was different. Everyone was different because each family was different. And so this is when you have different teachers of hula, different teachers of lomi lomi. There is no right way. They all are a piece of the whole. And we all share that. We should not ever criticize another teacher for their ways. It's just different from what one teacher may have taught. And so the values are what connect all of us to each other. The language, lua, hula, lomi lomi, all of these. And I'd like to read something to you, a little bit about why we need Hawaiian values. These are universal core values. And this comes from the great sage, Dear Abby. And it is called The Paradox of Our Times. The paradox of our times is that we have taller buildings, but shorter tempers, wider freeways, but narrower viewpoints, We buy more, but enjoy it less. Have bigger houses and smaller families. More conveniences, but less time. We have more advanced degrees, but less common sense. Isn't that the truth? Huh? More knowledge, but less good judgment. More medicine, but less wellness. We have multiplied our possessions, but reduced our values. We have higher incomes, but lower morals. We've been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet a new neighbor. We've conquered outer space, but our inner space is still a mystery to many of us. We've cleaned up the air, but polluted the soul, split the atom, but not our prejudices. We talk too much, love too seldom, and hate too often. These are times of steep profits and shallow relationships. More leisure, but less fun. 2 incomes and more divorce. It is a time when there is much in the show window and nothing in the stock room. A time when technology can bring a letter to you in seconds, and you can choose either to make a difference or just hit delete. So this is why we need values nowadays. Our children, many of them have not been taught the values of what we need to do. Every time I'm on the highway and somebody opens their door into the road, I always say, that parent, his mother never taught him how not to open the door when the cars are coming through, you know. So these are simple things that we notice now. Our children are lacking. Our grandchildren are lacking. I have 17 grandchildren. And it is quite a responsibility, even though many of them are not here. They don't live in Hawaii anymore. But as a grandmother and as a mother, I need to make sure that they have these values available to them. Now, when you try and preach to kids, what do? They're not going to listen. So the ancient ways that were taught, just like our kupuna could practice lomi lomi by doing it in their homes. Hawaiian values were shared by stories. And this is how they could, they could get away with sharing the values and share this with their families and still be okay and fly under the radar. And so till now, values are important. And this is how we can share them with our families. Now I want to ask you a question. Where is your treasure? Where is your treasure? Is it in the bank? Is it parked in your garage? Or is it cuddled up in bed at night when you're tucking in your children? We need to pay attention and put all of our efforts where our treasure is. And just a little time with our children makes a huge difference. You can share stories with them that they will understand. As you share a story, what children do is they pick up the essence of the story and they remember it. And so this is what they remember in times of crisis. This is why we have our values. Now, I would like to start. I have several Hawaiian values here, and there is no particular order. So I'm going to go around and have someone pick one, and that is the value that I would. Okay, thank you. Our first Hawaiian value is the word ho'omanawanui. Can you say that? Ho'omanawanui. And this is patience. This is a little, oh yeah, good what you did there. This is a story of a long, long ago, in a little fairy tale far away, there was a tropical kingdom. And there was a king who had a wonderful advisor. Now this advisor was so upbeat, he was so happy, he was so positive, and this really irritated the king a lot, you know. He was not a very positive kind of guy. Well, one day they were getting breakfast, they were cutting coconuts from the tree, and by mistake the king cut off his big toe with a machete. Oh my gosh, this was a terrible mishap. And when he went to tell his advisor what had happened, his advisor said, "That's wonderful." He said, "That is a blessing in disguise." Well, the king flew into a rage. And he got his cheerful advisor and threw him into a dry well and started off for home. Well, as this little fairy tale goes on, it says that on his way home, he was met by a bunch of headhunters who decided that this king would be a wonderful sacrifice. So they took this unwilling sacrifice to the tribal priest, who was anointing his body with oil, when he noticed that the king was missing his big toe. And he said to the king, "I'm terribly sorry, but we can only offer a full-bodied sacrifice. You are free to go." So the king ran straight away to the dry well where his advisor was whistling a happy tune, and pulled him out, and he said, "You'll never guess what happened. Just as you had told me, this terrible mishap was actually a blessing in disguise. Can you ever forgive me for throwing you into this well?" And the advisor said, "Sure. As a matter of fact, I'm really happy you threw me into this well." And the king is looking at him and thinking, "Oh boy, here we go again." And he said, well, the advisor said, "Look at it this way. If I had been with you, they would have sacrificed me." Now, what this tells us about patience is that the very worst thing may be manifesting in your life right now, right in front of your eyes. The worst thing you could possibly think of. Look at it carefully. It may be a blessing in disguise. You know, when we have patience, we're able to wait, and how we act while we're waiting shows how mature we are, without throwing a tantrum or something like that. And if we pick a fruit before it is ready to be picked, it's not very juicy, and it doesn't taste very good because it's not ready. In our lives, if things are not happening the way we want them to happen, maybe the timing is not right. Or maybe we are forcing our will on other people. And when we force our will on them, they don't learn anything. It is not the right time either. Ho'o manawa nui is patience. Okay, so I'll come over here on this side and see which one you would like to pick. Or, okay, thank you. She picked the word maupopo. Maupopo, can you say that? Maupopo. Maupopo means understanding. There was a woman, late at night, she was riding on the subway. And as she rode along, she was thinking how peaceful it was, how calm it was that late at night. Well, suddenly the door opened at one of the stations, and in came a young man with his 4 boisterous children. And they were running up and down the aisles of the subway. They were hanging on the bars. And she looked over there and was getting more irritated as time went by. And finally, she couldn't hold it back anymore. And she said to the father, "You know, why do you allow your children to do this? Why don't you discipline them?" And then she was feeling really smug about it because her children were in bed fast asleep. And she said, "They should be in bed asleep. This is a school night. You know, tomorrow's a school night." And the young man looked over at her and he said, "I'm terribly sorry." He said, but we just came from the hospital, and her mother just passed away. Well, this woman, of course, she felt so bad about what she had said, and as she looked at the young man and his children, her heart went out to them, and her heart broke for them, because now she could place herself in his place, and the understanding became clear that she should have given him the benefit of the doubt. She shouldn't have judged him so quickly. And this is what Maopopo is about. It is about us giving people a second chance. Even if we think we know the whole story, we may not. So share with aloha. You know, there's a little saying that I found it on Facebook. And I write lots of stuff on Facebook too. But there was something on Facebook that I read, and I wrote it down, and I thought it was really profound. You know, when you find some profound things on there, not too often, but every now and then you can find it. It talks about us not losing our aloha and not letting anything get in the way of us losing our aloha. To stay in the aloha canoe, to paddle deeply, and to come from our heart. And don't let anything or anyone keep you from losing your aloha. I thought that was such a great thought, because we're often in danger of losing our aloha when we get angry with people. And it is through understanding the situation, it is through patience and love that we can, and multiple understanding, that we can learn to be forgiving. Okay, let's see. Since you're right here in the front, I will put this chart chance. This one, okay. Our next Hawaiian value is the word haolele. Can you say that?
Haolele.
Haolele means faith. There was a drought in a Midwestern state, just like there's a drought right now. And this one particular community had most of the crops dry up, and soon there was no water for the cattle. And soon there would barely be enough water for them. So they gathered together in a little church to pray for the rain, which they needed so much. And as the time went by, an hour passed and 2 hours, and they didn't notice that outside there were clouds gathering, until they heard the crash of thunder and heavy rain pouring down on the church. All of them ran out of the church, so overjoyed and so grateful for the rain that would save them. And suddenly they saw a little girl that was standing there, and they all stopped. She was standing under the cover of a little pink umbrella, smiling from ear to ear with the biggest smile. Out of everyone who had come to the church to pray for rain, she alone had the faith that it would be delivered. And she brought her umbrella in her womanly wisdom. This is faith. You know, it takes faith to take the first step on a staircase when you can't see all the steps. The same thing is true if you're driving at night and you have your headlights on. Maybe you can't see the whole distance, but you can see so many feet at a time. So you have the faith that you can go that far, and then later on you can go a little bit farther. And this is what faith is about. Faith, there is let me see. Yeah, we have the saying, I have to see it in order to believe it. But the truth is, I have to believe it in order to see it. And this is Honele. Okay. Okay. Let's see. I'm gonna come over to you. Okay, thank you. I have my little notes in the back here in case I forget. This Hawaiian value is alaka'i. Can you say that?
Alaka'i.
Alaka'i means a guide or someone who guides you, or that you guide someone. You know, years ago, I used to live I owned a white ginger farm in Waimanalo. And it was 4 acres, white ginger, tea leaf, and heliconia. And I love this farm so much. It was way back on Waikupanaha Street, a beautiful view of the mountains. Run errands and haul my kids around. And it was very late that night, and I set out for my home to go out down the road. It was very, very no moon and no street lights, very dark. And as my car turned the corner, my headlights shone on a man who was walking along the street by himself in the darkness. And immediately I locked my door and I kept on driving. And as I started down the road, I heard a voice as clear as could be that said, "Stop the car, turn around, and pick him up." And I said, "No way." So I just kept on driving. And then I heard it again. This time it was louder. It said, "Stop the car, turn around, and pick him up." And again I said, "My mama didn't raise no fool. I don't do that. Okay, I'm not stopping the car." So I just kept on going. And the third time, it was very loud, and the voice said, "You told me to let you know when I need your help, and I need your help now. Stop the car, turn around, and pick him up." And I said, "All right." So I turned the car around. I figured by the time I get to this guy and I ask him if he wants a ride, he'll probably say, "No, thank you." And I'll say, "All right." And I'll just keep on going the way I had come. And so as I turned around, there he was, walking in the darkness. And I rolled down my window and I said, "Do you want a ride?" So friendly. "Do you want a ride?" And he said, "Why, yes. Thank you very much." So I unlocked the door. He got into the car and he said, "Weren't you going the opposite direction?" And I said, "Yes." And as I drove along, he told me his story. He said he had a DUI, so he couldn't drive to work. And so he had to catch the bus. And that particular day, he was so tired that he fell asleep, he missed his bus stop, he had to go down through the route again, and when he came back, it was so late. And he said that he didn't want to wake up his wife and children to, get them to drive and pick him up. So he figured he could walk, it wasn't that far. And as he walked along that night, he realized the mistake that he had made, because there were no street lights, and that night there was no moon. And as he walked along, he could not even see his hand in front of his face. He didn't know what direction he was walking in. And then he thought of the irrigation ditches. And he thought, "Oh my God, I'm going to fall into this, and they may find me a couple of days later." And as he walked, he prayed. And he asked Keakua to send someone to help him. And guess who Keakua sent? A very unwilling helper. And when I heard that, my heart was so touched, And when I took him home, I realized that he was my next door neighbor. Wow. Sometimes you never meet your neighbor because there's a lot of space in between. He was my next door neighbor. What this Hawaiian value teaches us is that we are our brother's keeper. you know, sometimes there are things where it's a lot of humbug to go and do something or to go out of our way. But just as we know someone would help us if we needed help, hopefully that will come back around to us when we need it. Alakai means to guide. We are guided. We are loved. And we all make a difference. Alakai. Okay, let's see. All right, thank you. She picked the Hawaiian value, lokahi. Can you say that?
Lokahi.
Lokahi means balance and harmony. There was a man who sold a mule to a farmer. And he told the farmer, you know, this is a very hard-working mule, but there's one thing you have to remember. You have to treat this mule kindly. So the farmer was very kind when he hooked this mule up to the plow, but the mule refused to move. And so he treated him even more kindly, and still the mule refused to budge. So he called the man back and said, you know what, there's something wrong with this mule. The mule won't pull the plow. And the man said, I think I know what's wrong. I'll be right over. So he came over with a 2x4 and he conked that mule on his head and the mule started to pull the plow. Well, now the farmer was very confused and he said, I thought you told me you have to treat him kindly. And the man said, you do, but first you have to get his attention. So what lokahi is about is, what does Keakua need to do to get your attention? To ask, is my life in balance and harmony? Am I living up to my potential? Am I doing all of the things that I can do to help my family and my friends and my fellow man? You know, we need to ask ourselves that question because we alone know the answer. Sometimes we say, Bye, we're going to do this. I'll tell you, I'll be in balance and harmony after I lose 5 pounds. Or maybe after my kids go to school, then I'll be in balance and harmony. Or they'll say, I'll be in balance when I find my soulmate. Or when I get rid of my soulmate. Or when Mercury is in out of retrograde, or whatever it may be that we're telling ourselves. The time to find balance and harmony is now. And it begins with us today to make the changes that we need to make. Not to wait till tomorrow, but to find what is out of sync in our life. And to vow to try harder, to be better in restoring it again. You know, from Tales from the Night Rainbow, there is this legend, which I'm sure many of you have seen already, and this is the legend of the bowl of light. And it says that every child that is born with a bowl of perfect light. That as he does those things which are helpful to other people, as he is kind, as he trusts his heart, then he can fly with the birds and swim with the sharks. But when he has a chance to help someone else and he doesn't do it, if he is angry, if he is upset and abusive to other people, he drops a stone into his bowl of light and some of the light goes out. And when he has too many stones in his bowl of light, all of the light goes out and now he becomes a stone. But when he's tired of being a stone, all he needs to do is to huli his bowl upside down and the stones fall away and the light comes back again. What this tells us is that we have second chances, or third chances, or fourth chances. And as we do those things that help other people, it helps us to be strong. It helps us to be the person we are working toward being. And it restores balance and harmony into our lives. Lokahi. Okay, I'm going to come on this side here, and you're down here. I'm going to have you. Okay, oh, you took the heavy duty one. She picked the card Kuikala, which is forgiveness. And Kuikala. And I have something in here that has to do with that exactly. So I'm going to have you open it, please. And take one out and pass it down. I'm going to take one too. The one you're not taking. And she is passing that down. This is your little makana that's in there. And this is a feather. And so you'll all get one. Whenever I go walking outside, in fact, I was just walking out there and I found a feather. Whenever I walk outside and I find a feather, I always pick it up. Because this is a gift from the former owner, which is a bird. And the bird didn't need this feather anymore, so he let it go. And what we can learn from that bird is that often we carry anger, we carry sorrow, we carry fear. And if we were a bird, we would never fly because we would always be so burdened and heavy by all of these things that we carry in our heart. When you look at this feather from now on, you can put it in your bag or put it on your dresser. Look at this and remember that there are things in your life that you can let go of. And it starts with forgiveness. You know, in the ancient ways, it was believed that if someone apologized to you, and if you didn't forgive them, you now had the heavier burden. And it could make you sick if you did not forgive them. And so this is also the basis of Ho'oponopono. And what we learn from this is we look inward to ourselves. And we look at ourselves. Remember those t-shirts, it says it's all about me? Have you seen that? Well, this is a Ho'oponopono t-shirt. It is all about us. And we look at ourselves instead of saying, what is it about you that is so irritating? Instead you say, what is it about me that finds offense in your actions? So we take responsibility for our actions instead of blaming the other person. Or we can say, you did this, so I'm doing that back to you. You stepped on my foot, so I'm going to step on your foot back. So the reason for my bad behavior is your bad behavior. And that's not in balance either. So we need to, in Ho'oponopono, what we discover is that we are empowered. When we realize we have held on to these things, sorrow, anger, fear. If we didn't hang on to it, we wouldn't have those feelings. But just like the wave that goes out and does not come back, or a football player that can only throw passes and not receive, we have stopped the energy from flowing back and forth by holding on too tightly. In some cases, this is in relationships. And so if your significant other is feeling stifled, guess what? It's us who's holding on to energy. It's us who's not giving them room to breathe, or it could be the other way around. And the power that we have in Ho'oponopono is realizing that if we have the power to hold on to a feeling of anger or fear or sorrow, we have the power to let it go. you know, people will say, oh, just let it go, let it go. It sounds so easy. Well, think about this. If there was a boiling pot of water on the stove and you touched it by mistake, how long would it take you to let go? Not long. Okay, so you can do it. You can let go of this. How do you let go? You need to forgive. Forgiveness is not an easy thing. The story of forgiveness. Huikala. Can you say that?
Huikala.
The story of Huikala is a story about a young lady named Sue. And she, her grandmother, Mrs. Jones, lived in this really nice neighborhood. Well, she lived next door to this witch whose name was Mrs. Wilcox. Not really a witch, but she just called her what a witchy person she was. Anyway, and for some reason, when they were young brides, they had been friends. And as they got older, something happened, and they became enemies. And now their children were enemies, their grandchildren were enemies, and they would blame each other for things like if the clothesline fell down and started walloping around in the dirt, they would say, it was that neighbor that did it. I know it was them. And so they would blame each other for all of these things that went on. Well, it would have been very hard for Mrs. Jones with a neighbor like Mrs. Wilcox, but there was a newspaper, and in this newspaper, people would write in if they had a problem, sort of like Dear Abby, and someone would write back who had a solution to the problem, and write back what they would do. And they would use a pen name, and Mrs. Jones loved writing in that article, and her pen name was Seagull. And she made many friends in this newspaper, but there was one person that she always wrote to, whose name was Firefly. And she would tell Firefly things she had never told anyone else, and they were like best buddies. Well, one day, the dreaded neighbor, Mrs. Wilcox, passed away, and even if you didn't like your neighbor, you were obligated to go over and say, is there anything I can do for you? And the family said, oh, you can sweep the steps for having the services at our house. So good Mrs. Jones went over there, and she was sweeping their steps when she looked over on the table, and there was a scrapbook. And there, neatly placed in the scrapbook, were all of the articles that were posted between Seagull and Firefly. And it seemed like the dreaded Mrs. Wilcox was Firefly. Her worst enemy had also been her best friend. And the young lady Sue said that was the only time she'd ever seen her grandmother cry. And it was because of the waste of time and that had gone on, and all the moments that would never be because of anger and because they couldn't forgive each other. Huikala is about forgiving and letting things go. It's about burying the hatchet, but bury the handle too, so you can't find it and you can dig it out again. So it is about sort of like putting an old coat into the closet, or maybe an old pair of swim shorts or swimming suit. You know, after a while it has all puka and everything in it. You're tired of wearing it, hang it up, put it away, give it away, and don't put it back on again. And this is how we need to be when we forgive. And we need to say, I'm sorry. Not like, sorry. That's not the kind of sorry that means anything. We have to say it from the heart. And even when it may be up to us to be the first one to say, I'm sorry, and your apology may not be accepted. But you know what? That's a chance we take. And if it is accepted, then we are so much happier, and we can let things go. When we cannot forgive, it's like two people who have this issue with each other. There's a cord, an aqua cord, that ties around them, tighter, tighter, tighter. And the more they struggle with it, the tighter it gets. As we forgive others, we cut that aka cord, and we let it go. And once that is gone, then we are free. So today, I would like for you to think of someone in your life or a situation that you can forgive with love. Sometimes we have a good reason to be angry and upset, but that's not the reason to hold on to it forever. As we let go of it, our burden is lightened and we are free. So today, think of that and take the step to say, I'm sorry. Or take the step to accept an apology. This is Kuhinapapa. Okay, let's see what else we have down there. Okay, would you like to pick one? Okay, thank you. In fact, this has a lot to do with Kuhinapapa too, but it's a little lighter. The word is ha'a. Can you say that? Ha'a means humility. And it's not about being a doormat either. It's about having a modest opinion of yourself, but also knowing your worth. And I would like to read a poem to you. And this poem is called The Cookie Thief. A woman was waiting at an airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shop, bought a bag of cookies, and found the place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. She read, munched cookies, and watched the clock as a gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking, if I wasn't so nice, I'd blacken his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. When only one was left, she wondered what he would do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and broke it in half. He offered her half as he ate the other. She snatched it from him and thought, oh brother, this guy has some nerve. And he's also rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she'd been so galled, and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed for the gate, refusing to look back at the thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane, then sank in her seat, then saw her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. Mine are here, she moaned with despair, that the others were his. And he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was a rude one, the ingrate, the thief. I love this story about humility, and it tells us about, it takes humility to say I'm sorry. So be humble enough to say I'm sorry and mean it. Ha. Okay, let's go back here. We have a few more. Okay, thank you. Our next Hawaiian value is the word ho'omau. Can you say that? Ho'omau. Ho'omau means to persevere, to hang in there. There was a little boy one day, he was out at Hawaii up here, and as he was fishing, he looked at this elderly man next to him who was also fishing. But this guy was doing something really weird. Every time he would reel in a fish, he would get his tape measure and he would measure it. If it was 8 inches long or less, he would put it into his cooler to take home. But if it was bigger than 8 inches long, he would throw it back into the water. So finally, after he did this so many times, this little boy finally went to him and said, "Excuse me, why are you throwing away all the big fish that are bigger than 8 inches long?" And the man said, "That's very simple. It's because my frying pan is only 8 inches wide." Now this man was a small thinker. And he thought that that's the only way you could do it. He didn't believe in cutting his fish in half or getting a bigger frying pan. And we are sometimes like this man. We think that there are tasks that we cannot do that are too big for us. We think there are situations within our job that we cannot possibly do. Mother Teresa said, "There are no great men for great jobs, only ordinary men that serve with great love." And this is to persevere, to hang in there through smooth sailing and rough seas. Be patient. Ho'omau is to persevere. Okay, we still have a few that are left over here. Let me come way in the back here and see. Okay. Choose one. Okay, thank you. She chose the Hawaiian value, aloha. Aloha, that's a very good word, and it makes us smile when we see this word. Can you say that? Aloha. You know, I worked at Lunalilo Home at one time. I was a nurse there, but also the job I enjoyed the most was as their activity director, because I got to play with the kupuna all day long and would load them into the van and take them holo holo all over the place and get them all kinds of stuff they're not supposed to eat. That was so much fun. I said, "Look, got cookies inside here. Juice, let's go." So, you know, I had so much fun with them. And through them, they taught me about aloha. That it's not just a word that you say, but we talked about it as being a vibration of love. And this is what it is. When they say to you, aloha, you know they mean it comes from in here. And it is a very special word. I have a friend who had a broken down old van. And as luck would have it, it finally conked out in Nanakuli. And so she left the van by the side of the road and she sat down on the curb, just wondering what she was going to do. She didn't have anyone there to help her. She didn't have any money, and she didn't know how she was going to get her van home. And as she sat there, there came a brand new Cadillac driving up with an elderly Hawaiian man. And he stopped his car and he got out and he said, "Hey, Tita, what's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, my van is conked out and I don't know what I'm going to do." And he said, "Well, why don't you let me tow your van and I'll tow it home for you." And she looked at him in amazement and she said, "You mean to tell me you're going to tow my broken down old van with your brand new Cadillac?" And she said she'll never forget what he said. He looked into her eyes and he said to her, "You are more important than my car." She said tears came to her eyes. Because this is aloha. This is the essence of aloha. Not to think of yourself, but to think of the other person and how you can help them. We are ambassadors of aloha every day. How you act, what you do, all the choices that you make, This is what will share the spirit of aloha and truly be meaningful in the lives of others and enrich your own life. There were some children who were asked what aloha was. There was a 6-year-old and he said, "Aloha is like when a puppy licks your face, only it's not so sticky." Another little girl, 6-year-old, says, "Aloha is what dolphins whisper to each other and to you when they pass under the ocean." I thought that was so cute. I can just see those dolphins going, "Aloha." Another little girl, age 5, said, "It should be a flavor of ice cream because it's that good."
Oh, that's a good one.
And the last one said, "Aloha is all the good feeling like love and missing someone, but it isn't so mushy." That sounds like a kid. So aloha is not to be fooled by outward appearances, but to feel what is within the heart. There are many definitions of aloha, and the one that I like is, I stand in the presence of Keapua, the divine creator. I acknowledge the spark of the divine within me, and I recognize it in others. They become my ohana. All that I see is love. It's sort of like my next door neighbors, the Tanakas. If you look at all their kids, you know they're a Tanaka because they look exactly like each other. Well, this is how it is with Keapua when he looks at us and says, "I know you. You're my child. I know you. You're my child too." And as we know that we are connected to each other by love, then we can share this aloha. What time are we supposed to end? Is it pretty soon? Will you please tell me? 11:30. 11:30. Okay, good. Okay, let's see. We still have a few more to go. Let's see if you're done.
That's why you said the clock is wrong. The red is not moving.
The Hawaiian value she chose is the word hano hano. Can you say that? Hano hano means dignity. This is a true story, and this story is about a man who had a great job, and he was brilliant in what he did. And through no fault of his own, the company had to fold up and closed, and he lost his job. Well, he managed for several months, and he still could not find a job. And soon he had used up all of his savings, and soon he had no money left, and he lost his home. And after that, he was wandering the streets, very, very hungry. He had not eaten for 2 days when he came upon this little diner, and he could smell the Portuguese sausage sizzling on the grill, and he could smell the coffee and see the pancakes. And he made a decision that he would go into this diner, he would order the biggest meal he could possibly order, and then he would tell the owner that he could not pay for it. And so this is exactly what he did. And as he finished every single bite of his food, he was stalling for time, waiting for more people to leave so that he would not be embarrassed by so many people when he told them he couldn't pay. Now the owner of this diner was a very compassionate person, and he had a sneaking hunch that this guy could not pay for his meal. And he was behind the counter, and he reached down as if to pick something up, and he came up with a $20 bill and said, "Oh, you must have dropped this." And he handed it to the man, and the man paid for his meal and was able to preserve his dignity. He never forgot this kindness that was given to him. And over time, because he was brilliant, he was able to find a wonderful job, rising to the ranks of president and eventually owner of a multi-million-dollar company. And you will hear about it at Christmas time, about a man who goes around in neighborhoods where the people cannot afford anything, and he'll reach down and pick up a $100 bill and say, "Oh, you must have dropped this," and he will give it to the family. Dignity is something that's very important, not only in our lives, also our kupuna. How do we treat them? Do we treat them with dignity? Are we, sometimes even our children, "I'll slap your head, get over here." You know, we need to, they will act like how we treat them. So this is very important. There's a little saying here that says, how far you go in life depends on your being tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant of the weak and the strong, because someday you will have been all of these. Hano hano, dignity. Okay, let me think. Okay, thank you. She chose the Hawaiian value, ke alaho. Can you say that? Ke alaho. Ke alaho is a new perspective. There were these parents who sent their daughter to college, and after the second year of college, she wrote them a letter. And this letter said, "Dear Mom and Dad, I met a really great guy, and unfortunately he dropped out of school when he was in the 10th grade, but he does have a job, you know, working at this little diner, and I have decided that I am going to quit school, and I'd like to go back to school later on, and I may be pregnant." Well, on the second page it says, "Dear Mom and Dad, everything I said on the first page is not true." But it is true, I had an F in French. And it is true, I need more money for school. I think she kind of set her parents up to accept almost anything. For the first letter. And they had a lesson on finding a new perspective. Kialaho means finding a different way to look at things. For example, even in Ho'oponopono we say it's about finding different ways to see things and not blaming others. I drew this beautiful picture all by myself, and I wanted to show you this wonderful picture here that I drew. Now, tell me, when you look at this, what do you see? Just yell out an answer. Eyeball, tire, eyeball, target, a hat, a what? A pico, puka. Oh, puka, a pico. Okay, what you have experienced in your life, this is what you see here. If you just had a flat tire, you're going to see a tire. If you love your egg sunny side up, then this is what you will see. Now, in judging other people, we cannot judge them by our set of rules, by what we've experienced. Someone waking up in the morning, they may look at this and be so happy and say, "Donuts!" And someone else, looking at this picture, may see the end of a loaded gun. Because this is what they have been raised with. So kialaho, or having a different way of looking at things, is also about not judging other people by our set of rules, by giving them a second chance, and by realizing that we are all different, and we all see things in a different way. Kialaho. And we have the last one. I guess I'll pick this one myself. The last one is the word kuleana. Can you say that? Kuleana. Kuleana means responsibility, or area of responsibility. This is a story about a little boy who lived in a little village, and he was diabetic. And no matter how much his mother begged him, he would still sneak all the candies and the cookies, and he would secretly eat them at night. And he was getting more and more sick. And his mother didn't know what she would do. Then she had an idea. She knew that he loved his uncle very much. And so she decided to make a 2-day walk into this valley to where his uncle lived. And she told the uncle that they were coming. And when they arrived after the 2-day walk, this little boy sat at his uncle's feet. And his uncle looked deeply into his nephew's eyes. And then he turned to the boy's mother and said, "You have to bring him back in 2 weeks." Well, the mother was very upset that she'd have to come back, but she did as she was told. And 2 weeks later, again, they made the long journey back to the uncle's village. And again, this little boy sat at his uncle's feet. And the uncle looked deeply into his eyes and said, "You must stop eating sugar. It is not good for you, and it is making you sick." And the little boy, because he loved his uncle so much, agreed to this. The mother was overjoyed, but she was also upset. And she said to the boy's uncle, "Why didn't you just tell us that 2 weeks ago when we were here? It would have saved us a long trip." And the uncle said, "It is because 2 weeks ago I was eating sugar." Kuleana is about example. Also, you cannot tell someone what to do unless you are doing it also. Kuleana. This is part of being responsible and a good parent. I would like to thank you for being here for our Hawaiian values. We have another Hawaiian values class tomorrow between 10:30 and 11:30, different ones. And it is more on us as women and empowering us. Okay, mahalo everyone.